Do you ever stop and think about how you will be remembered after you are gone? Now, I realize that death is not the most pleasant thing for any of us to think about, but I nevertheless believe that it is good for each and all of us, from the youngest among us even to the oldest among us, to every now and then take some time and think about things like this. I mean, after all, unless the Lord returns before it happens, all of us will one day die. Now, of course, if we live until the appearing of Jesus, there will be no one left behind to remember us because everyone will be entering eternity at that time. And that could occur before we die. That could occur before the end of this day, for that matter. But for the majority of people who have ever lived on this earth, that didn't happen. Have you ever thought about that? I don't know how many people have lived on this earth down through the ages. Now, I've heard some estimates, although I don't know that we can ever know for sure what the number would be. But whatever that number is, I do know that the majority of people who have ever lived have died. There are about 7 billion people living on earth at this time. But I've heard that throughout all history, there may have already been 100 billion people who have lived on earth. 100 billion people who have already lived and who have already died. And what that means is that, yes, the majority of people who ever lived on earth have died. And when they died, they left behind people who knew them and who would remember them. And assuming that the Lord does tarry for a few more years or a few more decades, and we don't know that, but assuming he does, this will be the case for each of us. And what I'm asking is, do you ever stop and think about how you will be remembered by those who love you, as well as by those to whom you may have merely been an acquaintance? Now, I know many people aspire to be remembered as fun people, maybe people who had a reputation for being adventurous, or maybe someone simply desires to be remembered as a kind and a friendly person, a good neighbor perhaps. I can see the appeal of being remembered in ways such as these. But at the end of the day, at the end of our lives, what is truly the most important thing that we need for people or want people to remember about us? Well, I got to thinking about this recently as I came across something written about one of the kings of Judah in the book of 2 Chronicles in the Old Testament. Judah, of course, was the southern kingdom in the land of Israel, following the division of the kingdom after the death of Solomon. But one of the kings of Judah, following that division, a man who was a direct descendant of Solomon and Solomon's father David, was a man by the name of Hezekiah. And in 2 Chronicles chapter 31 and down around verse 20, it is noted that Hezekiah did what was good and right and true before the Lord his God. And every work that he began in the service of the house of God, in the law and in the commandment, to seek his God, he did it with all his heart. So he prospered. That's not a bad way to be remembered, is it? Now, understand, of course, not every king was remembered this way. Not every king in the southern kingdom of Judah, and certainly not every king, really not any king in the northern kingdom of Israel following the division of the kingdom. Of some, it was said that they did not do right in the sight of God. There's even one mentioned a few chapters earlier in 2 Chronicles, at the end of chapter 21, of whom it was said that he reigned in Jerusalem 8 years, and to no one's sorrow departed. That king, Jehoram, he died, and no one was sorry to see him go. Certainly he was not so fondly remembered, either by those who knew him or by the scriptures themselves. But Hezekiah, he is well remembered to this day by students of the Bible. In fact, where I personally am concerned, I do believe that David was the greatest king that Israel ever had. He, of course, reigning before the division of the kingdom. And he is fondly remembered as well, by the way. But after David, while there are a few who might reasonably be considered for the title of greatest king after David, but really you'd be hard-pressed to find anyone more deserving of such a title than Hezekiah himself. He was remembered fondly by those who knew him, and he continues to be remembered fondly by the scriptures, which of course indicates that he is remembered fondly by God himself. And any person would do well to be remembered as fondly as Hezekiah is in that regard. But how does one attain to this? To such a fond remembrance once he or she has left this life? especially being fondly remembered in the eyes of the Lord? Well, I'll tell you a couple of things that Hezekiah did not do in order to attain this fond remembrance. First of all, I'll note that he's not remembered so fondly because he followed in the footsteps of his father, either religious or otherwise. He did not do that. Hezekiah's father, Ahaz, is remembered as a man, according to 2 Chronicles 28 and verse 22, who became increasingly unfaithful to the Lord because he sacrificed to the gods of Damascus. Many people will speak of their devotion to their religion and basically tell you that it's because it's what their family does and has done. But do you think that Hezekiah would be so fondly remembered if he had continued in the religious practices of his father in the name of family tradition? I don't. Some family traditions are worth keeping. But to base one's religion on what mama and daddy did is a dangerous thing to do. I'll tell you something else in this vein that is not the reason that Hezekiah is remembered so fondly. It's not because he didn't base his religion. It's not because he based his religion, I should say, or his actions as king on what might have won him favor with the world at large. What might have made other kingdoms and other kings more comfortable in dealing with him. Many years earlier, when God was first bringing the children of Israel into the land of Canaan, he had warned them in Deuteronomy chapter 18 and verse 9 against doing such a thing, against taking up the practices of other nations, and against overly concerning themselves with being pleasing to these other nations. As I noted a moment ago, acting like those of other nations was the major reason that Hezekiah's father is not remembered well in the scriptures. And this holds true for virtually every other king that the scriptures describe as being wicked in the eyes of the Lord. The key to Hezekiah's fond remembrance is not difficult for us to discern or to emulate. It goes back to what is written in the first passage that I cited a moment ago in 2 Chronicles chapter 31 and verse 21. Again, there it is written of Hezekiah that in every work that he began in the service of the house of God, in the law and in the commandment, to seek his God, he did it with all his heart. So he prospered. God blessed him in this life because Hezekiah served him with all his heart. And after Hezekiah left this life, God saw to it that he would be well remembered by those of us who believe. You know, his having been a king and all, there's a lot about Hezekiah that you and I would never be able to emulate. But you know, with regard to the most important things, wholehearted devotion to doing the will of God as it has been revealed, well, I can do that. And you can too. And while that might not win us fond remembrance after we're gone from this world by the majority of people that are left behind, it will win us fond remembrance among the people of God that we leave behind. And more importantly, it will cause the Lord to remember our lives on earth fondly as well. A life well spent in the service of God is a life that will be fondly remembered by those who matter the most. I hope you're taking steps to ensure that you will be remembered this way. And I hope you have a good day.